Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to wherever you are at the moment. My name is Dorit Grunewald. I am the coordinator of the competence area Food Security at the University of Cologne. And aim of the competence area is to foster a close dialogue between the diverse disciplines involved in achieving food and nutrition security. We are very closely related to CPLUS, the Cluster of Excellence on Plant Scientists, and together with CPLUS, we connect the plant sciences with other involved disciplines. And therefore, I'm very happy today that our panelists today come from different areas to discuss cross-disciplinary actions needed to achieve food security. And with this, I would like to hand over to Tanja Busse, who is our moderator today. Tanja, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Doris, and a warm welcome to all of you, to citizens, to scientists, to farmers, to food producers, to ecologists, and to everybody who is interested in the topic, what we will eat in the future, and in the topic of food security, of course. This is the public event of the second Cologne conference on food for future. And to me, it was great. I'm really delighted that I was invited to be a moderator today, because I think it's so important that you scientists tell us about your research, and that also people who are not daily talking and learning and researching about the future of food can ask their questions and give their ideas from maybe also the practical fields of food production. So I'm a journalist covering food, agriculture, sustainability, ecology topics, and this is why I'm really looking forward to listen to you on the panel. So what will we be talking about? This conference is about bringing together scientists from all disciplines dealing with food and food security. And this goes from plant scientists to geographers to economists and ecologists. And they all want to find out how to achieve food security, which is the second of the 17 SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, zero hunger. And we are still very, very far from achieving this goal, as there are still more than 800 million people going hungry, and even more, about 2 billion who suffer from malnutrition or hidden hunger, which is a lack of certain nutrients, which means they cannot afford a healthy diet to live a healthy life. And then we still have a lot of people, millions of people in affluent societies getting ill by making the wrong choices about their diet, which is extremely bad, that we are living in a food system where some people get ill because they have too little food and others get ill because they have too much fat, salt, and sugar. So there are huge challenges, and I think it's a shame for us in the 21st century that we still have to talk about food security. And then coming up with the climate crisis, this problem is even getting more delicate. For some years now, the number of hungry and undernourished people have been rising again, and the global food system has serious weaknesses for not being able to solve this. So this is a huge topic, and of course we are not going to be able to talk about all the issues that are related to that, but we want to make a try in this discussion. And we want to answer the questions: do we need an increase in food production, or do we need a better distribution? Do we need better access to resources? And before we start, let me introduce the chair of our discussion. It is Dr. Markus Stetter, and he is the group leader of the Institute for Plant Sciences at the University of Cologne. And he and his team, they are doing research on crop evolution and adaptation. And he has a special interest in amaranth. Dr. Markus Stetter, welcome to our discussion.
Thank you.
He will help us to send your questions to me, as he will be following the F&A function of this webinar. And you're all invited to send us our comments, your ideas, your questions, and please just tell us: do you want the questions to be read out? You can do this anonymously or also using your name. Just tell us if you don't want your name to be called about in the webinar. So, but please do send us your ideas, your questions. You're very, very welcome to ask, even from different, let's say, levels of scientific knowledge. You're invited to ask questions of understanding, but also questions of scientific research, whatever you want. Please let us know what you want to know. So, but now let me introduce my panel to you, coming from the University of Sydney in Australia. Here is a geographer who says the Green Revolution was built on fossil fuels and focused on grains, but did not address nutrient gaps associated with chronic hunger. And now we need a solution that is sensible to local geographies. Here is the head of the School of Geosciences, and he is also a professor in geography, Bill Pritchard. A warm welcome. Thank you for joining us from Australia. Let's now welcome a biologist working for the German development organization GIZ in Germany, who reminds us that hunger is complex. And she wants to highlight 3 areas. She says we need to address biological questions like breeding and climate change adaptation, and also the question of reducing food wastes and social issues. Sarah Schmidt, thank you for joining us today. Welcome, Sarah, and she is joining us actually from Sicily, and she interrupted her vacation. Thank you very much for this. Now, let me introduce you a young PhD student at C+, which is the cluster of excellence of plant sciences of the University of Düsseldorf that Dorit already has mentioned. And she largens our discussion even more by saying that the future of global food security has to be discussed in the context of climate change, social justice, economic development, and innovations in the fields of food production. And her focus is on new breeding technologies, including genome editing. And she is also a board member of the Eco-Progressive Network, which is called Ökoprog in Germany. Svenja Augustin, welcome to our discussion.
Thank you.
So now, to complete the panel, here is an award-winning agroeconomist at the Institute of Agricultural Science in the Tropics, which is called the Hans Rutenberg Institute at the University of Hohenheim. He is focusing on sustainable agriculture, food and nutrition security in Africa and in Asia. And he says millions of smallholder farmers constitute the majority of the world's hungry and poor. And we need technological and institutional innovations. And we need to look beyond prevailing paradigms to face these challenges. Dr. Thomas Daum, welcome to our discussion. So let's start with a young scientist now. It's your turn to give us your ideas and to work out what you have just sent us as your very short statements where you want to start. Svenja Augustin, can you tell us about your research you're doing as a young biologist, and what do you think is it? How is it linked to the future of food security?
Thank you, Tanya, also for the very nice introduction for me. My research as a PhD student will focus on plant development, and specifically I will work on a model plant. So it's not directly linked to agriculture, but plant development and also plant architecture have an impact on how plants set fruit and start to flower, and therefore produce the grain and the fruit we actually eat afterwards. So plant development is also strongly interconnected with stress response and also resource allocation. So how much sugar goes into fruit also plays into plant development and determines how many fruits we have and how large these fruits can get. Overall, I am very interested in the topic of sustainable food production, and as a member of the board member of the Eco-Progressive Network in Germany, we are very much into sustainable development goals, bioeconomy, and food production. And our starting point was actually plant breeding efforts, including the genome editing technology, and adapting it to applying it to various crop plants for a more sustainable and increased food security in the future.
So I need a microphone. When you say you're focusing on stressing factors on plants, this of course makes us all think about climate change, which is going to be very stressful for plants that have to face conditions that haven't been there for centuries. So do you think your research can give a response to these stressful environments that we are facing in the future?
I definitely think so, that increased plant breeding efforts and an accelerated translation of findings in basic research will help ensure food security and stabilize crop yields, definitely.
Thank you so much. Let's switch over to Thomas Daum, who is an agricultural economist and has a different perspective, not so much from the inside of a plant where the sugar goes and how large the fruit will be, but what these plants maybe and the structure of the agricultural systems do to smallholder farmers and how they can, well, adapt to the situation, and how your science can help to increase their incomes, as it's really effect that smallholder farmers are affected most by hunger, which is striking, I think. Thomas Daum.
Yeah, thank you, Tanya. Well, that's really the starting point, no? The assessment that most of the world's hungry are actually smallholder farmers, which is kind of surprising to begin with. But then if we think of how they typically farm, for example, in Africa, it's typically very low yielding, like a ton of maize, maybe 1.5 tons per hectare of land, using very simple tools with very little amount of land. And that makes it very difficult to produce enough food, enough nutritious food for the family, plus ideally to generate some income for those families, for example, to send their children to school. So our starting point is how to improve their situations, and clearly that include some kind of technologies, and there are different paradigms, how they should look like. Should they be more like agronomic practices? That's more like the agroecological paradigm, or should it be more technological innovations, improved seeds, fertilizer, and so on? That's more the green revolution or sustainable intensification paradigm. We say both of these have probably a justification, and we shouldn't really portray them in such a black and white manner, but we should take the best out of each of these. But we argue that it's very important to go beyond just looking what is happening on the farm and these technological fixes. We really need to have very strong institutional support for these smallholder farmers. They need good access to markets, to credits, finance, insurance. All of these aspects, we believe, are very key to improve their situation.
Okay, we'll come back to this most definitely. But now I would like to ask Sarah Schmidt into the discussion. As you have been doing scientific research before joining the GIZ, the German Development Organization, or Organization for International Cooperation, what are your main insights that you have taken from the universities where you have done research as a biologist? Now it's almost a year now that you have been with GIZ, where all this knowledge is going to apply in a way that it helps farmers and also other citizens throughout the world. What are your ideas, Sarah Schmidt?
So thank you. Indeed, I've worked with a lot of crops during my research. I started with barley as my PhD work, then moved to tomato, melon, banana, and most lately rice. And now I'm at GIZ, and I'm working in a unit at the GIZ that is supporting international agricultural research at the CGIAR. The CGIAR is a global research partnerships for food secure future, dedicated to reducing poverty and enhancing food and nutrition security. It comprises 15 CGIAR research centers that are currently independent and non-profit research organizations. They're going through a major reform process, that they are really united as one CG. And what's most striking working at GIZ, and I think one of the things that frustrated me in research was a little part that you are focusing on. And at GIZ, I get a much more holistic view on food systems, on what science can do, what science cannot do, where science can help. And I think for me, one of the most important things is that solutions for food security need to be local and context specific. We need to understand the problem that we want to solve. And I would advise any scientist who wants to work in food security, fall in love with the problem, not the solution.
That's a good sentence to take. Just give us an idea, because we have heard that Svenja Augustin is focusing on the plant to become more powerful, and Thomas Down says we need also the farmer to become more powerful, and there are a lot of limiting factors around. Do you think there can be a connection by thinking locally, but then how will this work? Can GIZ help there to make this connection?
GIZ can help, and I would also like to add another dimension to that, actually, because we also need to look at who is actually affected by hunger. And for example, hidden hunger is affecting 2 billion people worldwide. And most of these people are women and children. And if we want to solve malnutrition as a problem of hunger, we need to focus on women and children. Smallholder farmers are important. They are very important for food production, but we should also keep in mind that half of the agricultural workforce in developing countries is women. And women have a higher need, women and children both have a higher need for micronutrients, especially during breastfeeding, during pregnancy, and during the first 1,000 days of a child's life. So if we really want to tackle hunger, we need to focus on women and children.
I'm trying to take notes. We have to come back to this question of how to enhance the nutrition of women and children, and also about this important link of scientific research and how it gets to the farmer, and how also maybe the farmers and the women farmers, of course, can give their demands to the scientific community. Maybe there are linkages. But first, I want to ask Bill Pritchard to give us his side, as your focus as a geographer is the local geographic situation. It's exactly what Sarah Schmidt said. It's a solution is local and is not a global solution to fix all the problems. And you have done a lot of research in Australia with farmers in Australia who work really different than their colleagues in Myanmar, in Indonesia do. But you know very well all the part that is far away from us here, being in Germany, and with a lot of different systems. So can you give us an idea what geography tells us, apart from you have to find a local solution for a local problem, with being global problems causing these local problems? Bill Pritchard.
Thank you, Tanya. And I'm delighted to be the last speaker at the moment, because I think what I might have to say touches on many of the things that Svenja, Sarah, and Thomas also said. As a geographer, my starting point is that place matters, that the places and spaces that people are in is very important. I probably disagree with perhaps the way you phrased it, Tanya. The local is important, but every local region in the world is connected to the global. You can't solely find solutions in the local. You have to think about how the local environment connects to global forces. And I think it's that question that's very much part of much of what I've been thinking through and researching when it comes to food security. Look, the world is doing very badly on food security. I think when the Millennial Development Goals were established in the year 2000, it was a time of great optimism. And a decade and a half later, when the Sustainable Development Goals were initiated by the UN, it became apparent that many of the targets weren't met and the targets had to be reframed. And just to give you one statistic, I'll only use one statistic here, but in the year 2006, 8.2% of the world's population faced severe food insecurity. That's defined. There are a few dimensions of this definition, but it mainly implies a household where for at least one day in the past 3 to 6 months, there was no food to eat, and people were unable to meet their dietary needs for a 24-hour period. Now, 8.2% of the world's population faced that scenario in 2006. In 2018, it was 10.5% of the world's population. So, you know, we're producing more than ever. And on these key indicators, we're going backwards. And I think it's not simply a question of production versus distribution. It's more complicated. It's what we produce and how distribution systems are organized geographically, but also socially. And just a few observations I'll make about some of the key findings in this broad research area. And the first is, and this touches very much on what Svenja was saying, we made great advances in the world in food security in the 20th century, particularly the latter decades of the 20th century, mainly through cereal grains research and development coming out of the Green Revolution. And that was vital. I don't criticize that at all. But where the nutrient gaps are now, they're in fruits and vegetables, dark leafy green vegetables, vitamin A rich foods, and some forms of protein, particularly plant protein. And historically, they've been underfunded with research. And I think part of the agenda is to match research money to where dietary gaps are. I think that's absolutely critical. And when we think of that, cereal grains geographically can be transported long distance and they don't perish. Fresh fruits and vegetables, these kind of things, there has to be more of a local emphasis on production, because although you can shift fruits and vegetables through air freight and things like that, it's expensive and it's only the rich that benefit. The people who need food need to have these kind of foods produced locally. Look, the other point I want to make is gender is really important. What we find is that in households where women have more influence in terms of household decision making, more of the household expenditure gets spent on education, food and health. And so food security is a gender issue, it's quite clear, at least in the sense of an equalisation of gender powers and relationships works towards better food security in developing country settings. And I'm sure in developed country settings as well, but I guess the data I'm talking about specifically relates to that. I think the third point I'll make here is that social safety nets are really key. A lot of my work in the past 2 decades has been in India, and India has very good national legislation on food security, but it's implemented by the state governments in India. And the state governments in India who have invested in food security have got very better outcomes in terms of undernutrition. So money that goes into social safety nets, protecting and making those systems less corruptible or less prone to maladministration. We're seeing big payoffs in terms of reducing hunger and malnutrition. And the fourth point, coming back to geography, I think, is that we also know that because livelihoods have been disrupted everywhere, people are growing less of their own food and buying more food from shops and markets. Convenience and location is really important. And across the developing world, there has just been a flood of bad food, highly processed, highly sugared, highly salty food. And that's often the cheapest food. It fills people's stomachs, particularly in Latin America, but parts of Asia, we see this a lot. And that's now led to this, this dual problem of people being undernourished, but also malnutrition in the form of obesity. So the food scenario in the past 2 decades, I think, has gone from optimism to pessimism. But I think we're in a better state now to understand where the problems lie and what we need to do to address those problems.
Thank you so much, Bill. So let's come back to the question of calories and also the question of bad food that is not making people really healthy. So by your faces, I guess I understood that you all agree on the question of it's not only a question of higher yields versus better distribution, but we have to deal with the question of food security in a complex network of social, climatic, and also scientific and local local situations, and there is no, so you don't need to discuss food yields versus a distribution, but we have to see this in a complex network, right? So do you all agree, or is there some, so this would be our starting point then maybe for the discussion. So when you said there before. There was a focus on calories, on grains, on cereals that could be distributed, and that in the end maybe led to the production of these highly processed foods that are making people sick. In the morning, the Australian researcher Mark Tester said we produce too much meat, enough grain, also linking to this idea, and we need more fruit and vegetables. And this is also what the Eat Lancet Commission says. Now we are having this imperative of we need more diverse food, and ecologists also tell us we need more biodiversity in the ecosystems to prevent the mass extinction event we're in now, and that will be worsened by climate crisis. So, but now we are facing a global food system that is depending, as you just said, Bill, on these large distribution ways. But by producing more fruit and vegetables, it could be chance for smallholders to produce for their local communities. Is this a way you're focusing? Do you see this could be a way out of the pessimism that you have mentioned, Bill? Maybe you can give us your ideas, but also the others from their experience.
I think one of the answers is certainly cropping diversity amongst smallholders, or production diversity, not just crops, because some economists would argue, I don't know what Thomas's view on this is, but some economists would argue economies of scale are very important and small producers should not diversify, they should specialize. Now, it is not completely black and white, that equation, but for many smallholders, they don't have enough, their farm size is not big enough anyway to capture economies of scale. So what's more important is that they get a diversity of production types that allows them to benefit from crops and production that comes in and out of different seasons. It gives them greater dietary diversity, and it enables those nutrient gap issues, the sort of fruits and vegetables, which are often more expensive in the marketplace. They could self-produce those commodities and then fill their nutritional needs that way.
Thomas, I'm very interested in your answer to that. Can it be a chance for smallholders to diversify?
Probably in some areas, for sure, to diversify their farms, to have more diverse diets, consequently. In some other areas, studies show that actually those who have better access to markets actually can have better diets because they buy these also fruits and vegetables from the market. It's just not possible for them to produce this mix along the whole farming season, a whole long year. No, if I'm currently in Sweden, if I think of which type of food and fruits and vegetables are available just locally throughout the whole season, that's very, very limited. So I see his argument, and I think there is much appeal in that probably a lot of smallholder farmers should produce more diverse food, and producing fruits and vegetables in particular is important in that. But we shouldn't say that markets and buying from supermarkets is bad. They do give us these cheap calories, and there's also some benefit in that. No, in India, for example, having these cheap calories has really helped to reduce hunger, not hidden hunger, but hunger to a large degree. But we need to set the right incentives, not for supermarkets maybe to offer more diverse food, for these big food companies not only to sell cheap products. But I think with good policies, we can go into that direction.
Can you name these policies? Yeah, can you name these policies? What kind of policies could help to because this is a global problem to solve, I think.
Yeah, no, like what Bill mentioned, funding, for example, funding of fruits and vegetables has been neglected. Also, some of these orphan crops, millet, yam, for example, in Africa has largely been neglected. We just need to push more money there. And some of the things are neglected by the private sector because these are local products. There is not a global market for them. So the public sector may have to come in there. Other things, there could be sugar taxes, for example, but it's always a trade-off. Like when you have people who are obese in your country, as well as people who are undernourished, who really don't have enough calories, if you put things like a sugar tax, you address one issue, but then you make the other thing worse, basically. But I would be curious, because Bill didn't mention this about the role of livestock in the future. He explicitly only talked about fruits and vegetables, if I understood it correctly. What does he think about the future of livestock?
And also the other two, but let's start with Bill and go to Sarah and Svenja then.
I don't want to dominate the conversation. Look, Thomas makes some good points, and I'm not anti-market at all. And I think animal protein has an important role to play. I think some portions of the global population overeat animal protein, absolutely. But animal protein, particularly chickens, chickens, small, pigs, goats, small farmyard animals are really important, and I would never be against that. Maybe we should let someone else speak for the moment. I don't want to talk too much.
Okay, no, you won't. We have time to go and we have lots of questions left, but let's go to Sarah then, because coming back to this meat question, maybe you have the global focus, seeing a lot of countries in the global south, also seeing the countries in the north that have this huge meat discussion of like 60 or 80 kilos of meat being eaten in Germany, making people sick. And of course, in Africa, it's a different situation. What is your idea on this? Maybe also taking in mind the global pressure of climate science and the need to reduce greenhouse gases by the production of meat.
Well, animal protein causes. Oh, sorry, Sarah, was it?
Let's Sarah, and then we come back to you, Bill.
Oh, my apologies.
I actually agree with Bill. So we need less meat in some parts of the world. Less eating, especially in Europe, in the US, and South America, and we need more animal protein in other parts of the world, especially in Asia, especially again for women and children, because 40% of women in developing countries suffer from iron deficiency, and animal protein is the best source for that. So I do think that there's a point, and one of the problems with animal production, especially in Africa, is the low productivity. So there's a very high, they have a very high greenhouse gas imprint, animal production in Africa, because it's so inefficient in the way that, like what one animal produces in terms of meat or milk or dairy, is very low, because the food that they get, the feed that they get is usually not so good. So there's a possibility to increase that and to make it more efficient and more accessible for people, because meat eating is a very complex issue, and many cultural customs and ideas and local customs are attached to that. Even in Germany, we have these kind of ideas that a real man eats meat, and these kind of ideas, they persist everywhere, and that is a huge hurdle to making sure that the right people get the right nutrition. So, and this is something that is very difficult to address with science, because this is maybe with social science, but this is like a cultural problem that you need to address, and that's why it's so important that we have a local solution, because local eating habits, local customs, they are different from country to country, they are different from region to region, and we need to make sure that we are addressing the right problem to solve the problem. Mm-hmm. I would like to add something to the fruit and vegetables, because that is very important. And there are two reasons why fruit and vegetables are not eaten enough, especially in Africa. One is it's too expensive, and that has something to do with international markets, with food policies, but also a lot with food laws. So, and that's something that science can also address. 1/3 of the food that is produced is never eaten, because it is either lost during production or the supply chain, or it is wasted by us as consumers or supermarkets because it doesn't look good. And that's something we can address. I mean, improving cold chains or longer shelf life of fruits and vegetables, that is something where science can really help to address, to reduce food losses. And I think that's very important, and that's a point where science could really make a huge impact.
Can you give us some ideas how to do this? I mean, apart from like making shelf life longer. There could be a way of distributing fruit and vegetables to local communities which is maybe not possible for farmers right now, or giving knowledge via digital information means that helps farmers to grow more food or to sell it where it is needed. Are there any ideas in your in the GIZ or another scientist who said, okay, we can do it like this?
There are many ideas, and especially there are a lot of local ideas. And one thing that GIZ, for example, is also doing is supporting startups, small startups along the food supply chain in Africa to see, because there are many people with ideas. I mean, we as scientists in developed countries are not the only people with ideas. You know, they have many local ideas that exist, and quite often it's just a small grant that is needed, or a small loan that is needed to get these ideas going. So I think that there are many ideas out there, many really good ideas, and we just need to listen to people and help them access markets, access investors. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing that GIZ is doing.
Mm-hmm. What is the role? I think from what I know, the role of information technology is very important in this field to help farmers to connect, to change knowledge. And there are a lot, as you said, I've at the Global Forum for Food and Agriculture each year in Berlin in January, there are lots of young African inventors, startup founders who say, okay, I learned there were pests and I didn't know what it was. And then I had this startup to inform each other to know how to deal with this problem. Do you think, how can we help these people to reach more people, or do they need funding? Do they need what do they need to help each other more in the local networks? Do you have any ideas for this?
Again, it depends on whom you want to reach and in which country you're working. For example, in India, I mean, mobile phones are everywhere. Everybody has a smartphone, so that's fairly easy. In Africa, many people still have old school mobile phones. So then the kind of IT solutions that you can use are different. Also bear in mind that many smallholder farmers, especially women, are illiterate. So if all the information is transmitted by text, it's probably not going to reach anybody. So I think keep in mind, which problem do you want to solve, and which is the group of people that you want to address, and then design a solution for them. I think that's why I say that context is so important, because it really matters to whom you're talking and whom you want to reach.
Maybe Svenja, Thomas, or Bill can give us good examples for information technology. And as a radio journalist, I'd like to add that there are also radio problems that help to connect farmers in remote areas, which I liked very much, of course. But maybe you have other examples where information technology can actually help in this part of getting access to markets, getting more knowledge to your fields when I'm not connected via internet, but when I have a smartphone somewhere in Rwanda. I don't know. Do you have any examples?
I can share some examples. We did quite some research on digital agriculture in African countries and then also in India. And like you say, one thing are these tools that help to connect farmers or farmers with other value chain actors. And they are really exciting examples, often really from local startups. We did a study on Uber for tractors. That's Hello Tractor in Nigeria. The idea is to better connect farmers with tractor owners. That doesn't work exactly how they envisioned it, because like Sarah said, phone ownership is still relatively low. So they still work with some kind of intermediaries to pool together the farmers. But still, that seems to be very promising. Or we did some studies in India, in the livestock sector, a tool that helps farmers to optimize herd management, for example. And that's really fantastic. There are a lot of things happening. But often there are also constraints, like Sarah mentioned, some of them, phone ownership, the cost of data, digital literacy is also an issue. Sometimes if you really want to have a very good developed app, in particular for those that optimize farm production, you require some kind of data that typically is generated by the public sector, but in many countries it's not there, like soil maps that are very good, for example, or good weather data. Some of these data you would need to really make these digital tools very impactful. At the same time, these are not silver bullets either. There's so many things that we cannot address with digital tools, but I think they really give us new ideas and help to reduce these transaction costs farmers face and help them to optimize farm production in many ways. And by the way, this not only includes tools that are specifically designed for agriculture, but things like WhatsApp, that's super popular among farmers, in particular now with COVID-19, to see how they can sell their products, to access extension services. There are farmer groups where they organize themselves, or things like YouTube. I think that's a fantastic example. In India, we see this a lot, really democratizing somehow extension services. Like they make videos on how they solve an issue on their farm at the local level, and then other farmers can look at this. So there are really, really a lot of nice developments in this area, I would say.
Maybe also the paying system via smartphone that has made banking more easily for African farmers to buy and sell and to get connected. So they just didn't need the fixed telephone, the old-fashioned telephone that we used to have, but they just switched to smartphones to connect, to pay, to do all the things that, make farming more easy. Svenja Augustin, I would like to come back to the role of women that you can answer maybe as a women for a researcher in a technological field of new plant breeding methods, but also of the role of women, where for a lot of their importance, they need better diets. Children and women need better diets. They need the power to spend the money on the good, important vegetables, not on too much meat, and they need a special role. What are your ideas on this? What are your observations?
So I'm grateful to talk to this topic, because I like Zaha, I really would like to stress the importance of women and children and empowering them in this in the field of food security. That means food production and also access to specific nutrients where they don't have equal access to right now and not sufficient access to. That is also a point that the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations actually addresses in their latest report on food security, where they detail on how to educate women and children and empower women as farmers to get them access to better agricultural practices, ultimately resulting in higher yields for their farms, for example. Another issue that Zaha and I believe also Bill brought up is the issue of hidden hunger that affects women and children more often and more severely than men in most areas of the world. And even though that is something that Thomas would term a techno-fix, I think that there are technological things, technologies and innovations we can use in the field of biotechnology and plant breeding that might alleviate the acute need for iron and vitamin A, for example. In iron, it is, for example, in the US, pretty common to have iron supplemented flour, for example, to alleviate the acute need for iron. That doesn't mean that people should not have, and especially women and children, should not have improved access to animal protein, but it might be a way to alleviate the acute need and the acute malnutrition. The same applies for vitamin A, for example, in Asia, where many children suffer from vitamin A deficiency. And I'm pretty happy to see that the so-called golden rice, a genetically modified rice that contains beta-carotene, a substance that can be converted to vitamin A by the human body, is now increasingly adapted in Asian countries, for example, the Philippines, now officially said that that they will start growing golden rice, and therefore it might be an opportunity to couple their daily rice-based nutrition with their supply in vitamin A. That is not to say that they don't need fresh vegetables anymore. They still need that, but maybe, hopefully, this technology will help to alleviate the acute need for vitamin A, and especially the younger people on the Asian continent. And one last thing concerning the meat consumption that I would like to mention, I agree with the other three panelists. We need to increase animal protein availability in some areas of the world, but reduce meat production and consumption in Europe. And one way might also be to make cool and tasty meat alternatives available. For example, in Europe, when there's a stereotype that real men eat meat, let's make the plant-based burger patty a real cool thing that is even cooler than the animal protein-based burger patty.
Thank you so much. Please tell your colleagues, your male colleagues, about this, that it's cooler to eat climate-friendly meat than meat that. Okay, we agree on this, but still, you said, okay, Thomas, you called it a techno fix. Your idea was to solve acute malnutrition by adding supplements to food, which to me might translate to the question, I'm a local farmer, I'm producing flour, I'm producing vegetables, or producing something without these supplements, and the idea might be, oh, it's not as good at the supplemented fruit. So Thomas, how do you respond to this idea of course, we can add nutritional value to solve acute problems, but still to help smallholders to have access to the market, they need to sell natural food containing a lot of vitamins and nutrients. Do you see there a gap between the technological solution and the, let's say, the smallholder friendly solution? Can you solve this for us?
Yeah, well, I use this term technological fix, but I don't want to imply that all of these things are bad. I mean, this vitamin hidden hunger is a really big issue, and it really has severe consequences on people, you mentioned children in particular, that can really affect their physical and development, and that's really irreversible, no? That really affects them for their whole life. So I don't think we should say some technological fixes, we don't use them just because we have some concerns whatsoever. And there were very interesting things, like Svenja mentioned, also in African countries, in Asia, we have this golden rice. In African countries, we have other things. And some things are produced with conventional breeding, others with genetically modified, but there is a wide portfolio to pick things from. What I'm concerned is that we only focus on these technological fixes, and then that's a solution for in the very acute situation, but then we neglect creating more diverse food systems to begin with. And the money that we spend, we can only spend it once, and if we spend it on these engineering things, we cannot spend it on other aspects. That was my concern. But I think Svenja also mentioned that we shouldn't neglect having fruits and vegetables available for them. So
and she stressed the importance of our male part of the population of coming of retrieving from the idea that they need too much meat that the planet can bear. Maybe Bill, if you're ready to come back into our discussion without taking too much room, I would like to hear your perspective on this question of either of more efficiency, more technology maybe can help, and what the farmers you have worked with say, because I have experienced a lot in Germany, also in Africa, that there is a strong need of farmers who say, we want to go to scientists and tell them, this is our need, can you help us with this? And these networks between farmers on the local level and universities who are designing their research together have been have given a lot of fruits, good ideas, and a good collaboration. Is this your experience too? And maybe a solution to the question whether we need technological or sociological fixes?
Well, we need technological fixes that are relevant to social problems, you know? So one of the lessons coming out of the Green Revolution, and I'm not a critic of the Green Revolution, I think it addressed massive supply issues in cereal grains at the time. It was very necessary. But a lot of the famous dwarf wheat that Norman Borlaug developed, its characteristic was that it needed to be harvested at the same time. It was conducive to mechanical harvesting. And so very quickly in many parts of the world, that led to larger farmers getting more gains than smaller farmers. So the lesson out of that is, don't criticize the technology, maybe think of how do we get new technologies that help small farmers. And I think that's the challenge we have. So if we take something like, the golden rice or the various genetic modifications that we've been talking about before, some people approach these issues ideologically, and they say that, oh, I'm opposed to genetic modification in all its manifestations. For me, it's always been a sort of a question of empirical outcomes. Does it solve the problem? And to me, I've always asked the question, well, who owns the breeding rights, the intellectual property? Now, in the case of golden rice, that's under common law, it's like freely available. And I think that's produced great benefits as a result. I think where technological fixes are particularly dangerous is if it's attached to intellectual property rights, particularly large agro corporations who their product might be good. It might increase yield. It might increase the nutritional benefits of a particular fruit or vegetable. But if it's associated with extraordinarily high profit opportunities for them alone, then that's problematic in terms of fixing a social good. So I think you can't be anti-technology. We want technological solutions, but they have to fit the social problems and they have to have the right institutional contexts. They can't just be machines that allow large corporations to increase their profits as the endpoint.
I think that's where a large part of the criticism comes from, is that in Brasilia, in Southern America, we have experienced that large corporations have had a lot of profit with an ecological disaster on, for example, on the production of monocultural maize in large parts of the country, and so that it didn't fulfill all the promises that have been there. But before we work out on this, maybe I invite all our listeners to ask questions or to give us their ideas, but because so far I haven't seen any questions, you're really, really invited to ask questions. What do you want us to talk about? On my list, there is the climate change, the mass extinction event, and but you are free to give us more questions. So please don't hesitate, just write, and you can do it without giving your name, just anonymously ask your questions or give us your ideas. So we are talking about the question of food security in an era of climate crisis, and we are in the midst of a sixth or seventh, as some scientists say, mass extinction event. And they say the number of species that are going extinct is rising and rising to critical level that might cause regime shifts, that might cause whole ecosystems to get destructed, and that might not be able to deliver calories, not even talking about a great variety anymore. So how do you all respond to this question of the need to take ecosystems more into account, of strengthening biodiversity, and can agriculture play a role in this? Svenja, I see you're ready for an answer.
Yes, that is exactly the kind of topic we are addressing within the Eco-Progressive Network, because there's a huge debate going on about land sharing or land sparing. And I think this is often overseen when we're talking about increasing yields. So when I talk about increasing yields, I don't necessarily mean increasing the overall output. I primarily think about yields per area. And if we can increase yield on a certain set amount area of arable land, that might help us address the issues with biodiversity and climate change in two different dimensions. One is we really have to spare more land and stop the conversion of forests and marshes into and other natural habitats into agriculturally used land. That is a trend we need to reverse up to actual rewilding projects. And for that, we need to increase the yield per area on the already used area and not further increase our agriculturally used area. And then, of course, agriculture is super interesting, in my opinion, because it has a dual role in climate change. One thing is that agriculture emits carbon dioxide and climate change related gases, which is a thing we need to reduce. And this is closely connected with the land use change. And as soon as we convert land from forest or marshes into agricultural land, this soil loses part of its ability to store carbon dioxide for us. So we need to go for a kind of agriculture that uses less land, produces more on this land, have some sort of rewilding campaign, and make our agriculture transform our agriculture in a way that we need less soil tilling, and so that the plants and also the soil are capable of storing and capturing more carbon dioxide for us.
Thank you so much, Svenja, and also to your cat that is sharing your screen and ideas. I think she's very interested in the discussion too. So we have a complex task for agriculture, that's very obvious, but the good part is farmers can be part of the solution, as land can be a carbon thing, and this is a great message. So what you described was the land sparing option to increase yields, to rewild other parts, and I think this is very, very important for Brasilia, for Indonesia, for regions where rainforest needs to be restored, if this is even possible. But in Europe, we are having what we call a cultural landscape where biodiversity has grown with a very diverse agriculture, and there I think there could be a great chance to have a land sharing, to have agriculture that has actually an increase in biodiversity and diversity of food. This is a bit what the Eat Lancet Commission suggests. More diversity in the diet can help to more diversity to maintain agriculture within the planetary boundaries. Does anyone support or these ideas, or do you have any suggestions to this question, land sharing, land sparing? You can just raise your hand and talk right away, Sarah.
I think so. I think in general, at least in most developed countries, we are on a good way not to, at least in Europe, not to lose more land because agricultural output has increased and land use is going down. So I think we're on a good way. But one thing that it's always problematic when you are increasing yields on a smaller area, and this is due to some of the changes that were made during the Green Revolution, is that the plants are more responsive to fertilizer. And fertilizer use in Germany, that's a huge problem. I mean, I think we have been asked by the European Union now for the second or third time to really reduce fertilizer use because Germany is over fertilizing. And that's another area where I'd see science and scientific innovation really needed. In some parts of the world, like in Africa, there's hardly any fertilizer use because fertilizer production is very energy intensive. Access to energy is a problem in many parts of Africa. In Germany, we are overusing fertilizer, which means that a lot of the nutrients that are not taken up by the plants go actually into the water. They are polluting water, they are polluting the seas. And if we have plants, if we are breeding plants that can better use nutrients, that are more efficient at taking up nitrogen and phosphate, that's the way of reducing fertilizer use and still increasing yields, or at least stabilizing yields, and not using more land for agriculture. And at the same plant having a better, more environmental friendly solution for people health and the planet. Also for climate change, I think there's a lot of things that can be done with, especially with breeding and scientific innovation. And climate change is everywhere. I mean, some countries are more affected than others, but this year we had severe floods in Germany, in China, in Bangladesh. We had droughts in Germany in 2018 and 2019. So the climate change is knocking on our doors as well. This is not a faraway problem. And I think that's also where we need science, because it's not just about increasing yields, it's adapting to the future. And the future is a changing climate, and we know that. And we know at 1 degree, but it will increase more. And I think these are things where science and innovation is really needed, where with breeding we can do a lot. And I think that's something that where scientific innovation can really make a difference.
Your suggestion to concerning the fertilizers, the very low-tech solution in Germany would again be coming back to Svenja's idea about male meat consumption to produce less meat. So we'd have less fertilizers, because our problem mostly derives in Germany. The nitrogen in water is just because we have too many animals concentrated in few regions in Germany. So this would be a very low-tech version to have less meat, and to ask the pork farmers who at the moment are really facing severe economic problems because the prices are too low, maybe to start producing vegetables and nuts and do agroforestry, and can help to have a more diverse diet. We do have questions in the chat right now, and Amelie Benson is asking, do you see a contradiction between in increasing yields and increasing farm biodiversity? And that's a really good question. I'm looking forward to your answers. So Svenja made the suggestion of increasing yields to spare land to increase biodiversity in the wilderness. And is anyone going to biodiversity on farms, maybe different terraces of production, the old food systems that in the tropics are used by smallholder farmers, having food production on several layers, vegetables, bananas, coffee, and maybe even trees? They're so beautiful agroforest solutions. Maybe Bill, can you tell us about your experiences in Indonesia or Myanmar, maybe?
Look, it's when I'm looking at Amelie's question there, I wonder about the word yields. Like, a yield is a measurement, and what are we measuring? If it's just output of one commodity per hectare, it's quite different to if we're thinking about yields in terms of what is the totality of nutrients for human consumption being produced in an area of land. So I think biodiversity is consistent with an optimization of producing nutrients for humans, but it's not a standard economic measure. It's sort of more complex measure. And it's also, as we all know, yields very much vary over time. And if fields are not left fallow, or if they're not supplemented with fertilizer, as you were saying a moment ago, or pesticides, if monocultures lead to particular insect problems, then yields are going to decline over time. You have to artificially keep them up, which is at higher cost for farmers. So I see this whole concept of how do we measure yields as being a question that needs to be debated as a starting point for answering Amelie's question. Sorry, Amelie, I wasn't giving you a clear answer there.
We go for Thomas, adding the term ecosystem services to this, because it has been very clear that just measuring yields in terms of one crop on one field is leading to increased yields of wheat, of maize, etc. But it's leading to a decline of biodiversity, maybe water protection, etc. And so if we say yield would be the whole of the problems we are facing, and talking about ecosystem services is yield, and there has been studies to measure this, maybe we can combine this. Thomas, what's your idea on this? Do you think we can combine this and have a more holistic approach to what a yield is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think we should carefully reflect on what the yield is. If we just focus on one crop, or like when we have intercropping, we need to take into account other aspects. I would need to think a little bit more about this. Like, what is the reverse? With low yields, do we automatically have more farm diversity? I don't think that is necessarily the case. I would need to think a little bit more about this. But I want to reinforce this point that Svenja was making, that this land sparing is really an important issue in this aspect, no? Like, much of the greenhouse gases that come from agriculture are actually from land use changes. And that's not only in South America, that's the same in Africa. In the last 2 decades, I think 75% of agricultural growth came from expansion of land into savanna land, for example. That's super bad for climate change. It's also a big threat to biodiversity. So we really need to think about increasing yields. Then on the other sides, we should not only think about focusing on yields, like we have pointed out. No, we need to think about resilience, about local farm diversity, and organic farming has a positive account on the local level, no? But in the international level, then if you take into account these land use changes, the perspective changes. That's what I meant a bit in the beginning, that we need to look beyond these paradigms, that we shouldn't focus on either these directions, but we somehow need to find a middle ground to increase yields, but also make sure we have more farm diversity. And maybe some technological fixes will be of relevance here again, in particular, maybe in Europe. Like herbicides, maybe they will disappear in 20, 30 years. No, we can do so much things mechanically now that
using information technology.
Yeah, precision farming, things attached to the tractor in the back, or maybe in the future some kind of robots. So there are new pathways.
Or using biodiversity to limiting the stress of monoculture pests. Maybe there are a lot of solutions, but Svenja, you look as if you were going to add something.
Yes, actually, I would like to add something. And of course, things like intercropping have been shown to increase the resilience of a specific culture. For example, intercropping with between legumes and cereals has been tested and has been shown to increase yields and resilience of the cultures. So first of all, I want things and agricultural practices that work. But on the other hand, we also, when we're talking about it, so that is an option to increase biodiversity in farms and also increase yields to some extent. But we also have to take into account another aspect here, and that is necessary work hours per thing we can sell as a farmer. And if a small-scale farmer needs to work more hours to get the same amount of crop, that is a problem because it also increases the price. And then he or she, as a farmer, has the difficulty of selling it and outcompeting more automated and industrialized agriculture that is more productive on less land. We have a trade-off here between working hours and automation and, let's say, diversification of agricultural land. Diverse land is less easy to work with automated and large machines on. And therefore the yield per working hour is also lower.
And
So
again, ecosystem services might be higher, but nobody pays for them. That's a very...
Yes, and that's true. But on the other hand, that the increased yields might also contribute to less land used, and therefore, increase intact ecosystem area across the globe. Of course, I would say that having a more productive and higher yielding crop plant does not automatically lead to less land, but that is something we can address politically. We can see how much yield do we need, and we can estimate how much area would this need. In Europe, that might actually lead to less land used, whereas in the sub-Saharan Africa, this kind of approach in combination with improved agricultural practices might lead to at least decreased acceleration of conversion of land.
But how can you combine this when you say if we use the economies of scale and make sure that that we have a more intense agriculture? To me, this sounded like if you were also using more machines and less people. And still, when we're facing the situation in Africa, we're still a lot of people, like more than half of the population, depend on agriculture. We cannot just say we're in the era of industrialization. We're sending them to the big cities and they will do what people did here for 100 years ago. But I think rural development researchers agree that in Germany, of course, too, but also in the global south, we need good work in the countryside to prevent too many people going to the big cities. Isn't this, how does this fit into your idea?
Yeah, do you, Tanya, want to tell people in Africa, please don't get education, go into the larger cities, stay on your rural countryside and do what your parents also did? That is also not a very sustainable and future-friendly solution.
No, I didn't want to say you stay there and do what your parents did and stay as hungry as they were, but I was kind of following the ideas of the conference of Cork in Ireland, where all the European rural development visionaries met and tried to find out how to make rural countrysides more attractive, to say the people, to give them a chance to stay where they are. Of course, those who want to leave because they don't want to remain in agriculture, they can go and give their ideas maybe to information technologies. But just to have this idea, I mean, because for many people, this translates into migration and an idea of a better future that maybe doesn't turn out. So how the idea would be how to create good work in the countryside.
Maybe I can
yeah, please.
Maybe Bill also later then. I think
Go
it's
ahead.
not that simple to say, like, if you don't use tractors, then automatically people have more work. Like a lot of farm labor in Africa is from the family. That is unpaid work. No one really earns money from that. Often it's the work of women in particular also, and often of children who cannot go to school. So by using tractors on the fields, in Africa, maybe that's different to Asia, where we see much more landless people who depend on this type of farm work. But in Africa, that's often family labor. But of course, like you say, Tanya, it's very important to create jobs in rural areas, in particular in Africa, where we have this youth bulge, like millions of young people entering the labor market. And there are not so many other opportunities for them, no? In the industries and in service sector, there are few opportunities. So probably that has to be in agriculture, but the question is whether this should be on the farm or maybe more along the food value chain. Probably we need to, there's this idea of agricultural transformation, no? That we really develop agriculture, increasing yields to kickstart overall development. We make these smallholder.
Thomas, I cannot listen to you anymore. So the connection to Sicily is good, but to Sweden it's not good. And to Australia it's good also. We're waiting until I'll give in. Maybe, Bill, I can give you another question of Carolina Kiesel, who is asking, I was wondering if you could touch on the topic of self-sufficiency versus food security. Is there a need for a change in the overall discourses, especially in the global souths? So can you follow her idea of not talking about food security, but maybe self-sufficiency of local areas?
These are very difficult ideas. Food security really, under the sort of UN definition, is that everyone has enough food to meet their nutritional, economic, and cultural needs. So food security, the concept of food security is to provision a population with food that meets their needs. Self-sufficiency is, I guess, more of a local supply-driven agenda. Is there enough food being produced locally to potentially meet those needs? I think the way I'd answer this question is that self-sufficiency is often a good mechanism to achieve food security, but I think self-sufficiency alone is usually not adequate. There's no problem with trade so long as it's done, within fair and equitable arrangements. And I think that we should encourage self-sufficiency, but the ultimate goal should be food security, because that's a social aspiration.
Mm. And if we go on top, and if we talk about food sovereignty, meaning that people are not only fed with someone else, but have the right maybe to develop their own food system. And I would like to connect this to another question of someone who asked, what are your ideas to measure on measures to ensure in order to include all stakeholders involved in agriculture and food production when coming up with policies for food security? So what can we do? We have been talking about this before when we talked about the income of smallholders. Do you have any ideas to make sure that the plantation workers can make a living on their work, and that we have this kind of trade that you said that has to be fair and sustainable, which at the moment it is obviously not? Do you have any ideas? Maybe Sarah. Yeah. Okay, Bill, and then Sarah.
Oh no, I've answered. Maybe on to Sarah.
Go on. Yeah. Then Sarah, and then Bill.
I think that's a very good point. I think so. Leaving no one behind. That's basically the official standpoint of BMZ, of the German Ministry for International Cooperation and Development. And I think that's key. It's not easy, because one of the reasons why many smallholder farmers are smallholder farmers is a lack of access to information, to markets, to infrastructure. So it's not easy to reach everyone. It is very important though, because as I said before, local solutions, like locally adapted solutions, are the best solutions. And to devise a solution, you first need to understand the problem, and the problem is local. The problem of food sovereignty, the problem of food security, of malnutrition. So you need to actually be there to understand what the problem is, to find a solution. And this is not possible sitting in Germany in an office and thinking about this, what would be good for person X, Y, Z in another country. So you need to be there. And it's not just farmers. I mean, there are many people, like Africa's 60% of the population is under 25. So it's full of young people with ideas, with visions. So they just need to have a voice. And I think that's very important. The UN is trying to do that at the moment with the UN Food Systems Summit that will take place next week, I think. Took a long time to settle on a date. So I think that's maybe one step, but it also goes further. So what we do a lot when we work with the CGAR, they are working with the national agricultural research systems. They are working with national agricultural universities. And I think that's also a step. It's not the farmer yet. So working with farmers, corporations, encouraging farmer corporations. Those are also very important steps. It is difficult to get everybody on board, but I think those are the smartest solutions that can be designed. Also, coming back to one point that Svenja mentioned, education. That is so important. Agricultural vocational training, especially for young people, especially for women. That's what we need, because sometimes this knowledge is just lacking, knowledge that we already have, like about crop rotations, about healthy soils, keeping healthy soils. So this kind of information, we can build the capacity in people to come up with their own solutions. And I think that's a crucial point. And it's also something where GIZ is very active in increasing this kind of training, increasing access to education, and making sure that people can make their own choices about how they want to grow food and what they want to eat.
Which would be very close to the concept of food sovereignty, of determining what might be a good solution. But still, I wonder, we are talking about a global food system. We have been agreeing since the beginning, you all have been agreeing on the importance of local solutions and local conditions, but still we find that there is a domination of great corporations. There are like 2 or 3 in the trading of agricultural goods, and we are all working in an economy that pays for yields, but that does not pay for ecosystem services. And this is talking about climate change and biodiversity. To me, this is just not solved, because if you're a young farmer in, let's say, Tanzania, where we do have friends who are trying to get into farming with the whole kindergarten that they are teaching and growing trees and vegetables and taking responsibility in such a great program. But when they want to sell to a global market, they cannot sell all the educational work that they do. They don't get money for the ecosystem services that they do. So do you have a solution for this? We are facing a climate crisis, a biodiversity crisis, and we have a lot of farmers on a local level with good ideas, but still it does not pay back in this global system. What can we do to balance this? Who goes for ideas? We're still waiting for Thomas Gaum to come back, but Bill.
Tanya, nobody has the single answer. I think nobody in the world has an answer, because if we had the answer, we would fix it. But I think we can frame the problem in different ways. One is, I think we can get the prices right. I think that's really important. We don't charge for the environmental externalities, and I think everything from a carbon price to the payment of biodiversity credits to internalizing the environmental externalities in different ways. That's going to be imperfect. It might work. It might not work at all in rural Tanzania, but then it might work if there are border taxes and tariffs that take that into account. So if there are producers in Tanzania who want to export their product, those costs have to be incorporated in the price. So I think we can work at that level. But I think, getting the prices right is only one part of that. I think we need to get the institutions and the cultures and the ideologies right. And you talked earlier about this it's not just the tradition in Germany of men defining their masculinity through meat eating. I can tell you it's alive in Australia as well. And it's those kind of different ways of viewing the world that I think already the next generation is challenging in a way that would have been inconceivable just a short time ago. So I think it's a combination of institutional arrangements around the market, but it's also broader social institutions as well. I know that we're all in a COVID world, and international air traffic has fallen remarkably, and I think that's taught us many things. It's taught us that, I can be talking to this conference from Sydney when, if this conference was being undertaken 2 or 3 years ago, maybe I would have flown to Germany, to participate. And all the credit, all the carbon costs of that would have just been part of daily life. And I think globally, we're thinking about these issues in a much different way now. And I think the answer is going to be those wide-ranging changes to culture in combination with laws and new economic systems that price externalities. That seems to me to be the only way forward. Whether that's sufficient, you talked about the 6th or the 7th mass extinction event. I don't know whether we're going to hold off that, but at least I think we can attempt to move forward in a way that that's good for the planet and good for people.
By fixing the prices, finding the right prices. But still, this reminds us of how complex the question is that we are talking about. I'll try with the last question by Alexander Vollmann, who wants to know, it looks a bit like the silver bullet, can land sparing and improved soil fertility through cover crops and no-till actually reduce global warming and improve food security at the same time? So is there a way of new agriculture that can solve all the problems? Svenja, you look as if you were ready for an answer.
I believe that these two approaches, land sparing and no-till, actually can improve both, but they are not the single sole solution to it. So as we already discussed, food security is a matter of social, institutional, and educational support that might look differently in different areas of the world. So, but in general, it has been shown that no-till can improve the soil fertility and carbon dioxide, as well as water storage capacities, and reducing carbon dioxide emissions in the face of climate change is at least a step in the right direction. It will not be the one thing that changes it all, but it will be a step in the right direction.
Can I add biodiversity to this question? So can we improve crops and reduce global warming and increase biodiversity by using no-till without herbicides, which is really art? And I only know one a farmer who is able to do no-till without herbicides, which is really, again, coming back to your question of education. So having all these crises in mind?
Well, herbicides per se are a tool that we can use to benefit biodiversity as a whole by improving yields on a certain area and leaving other areas be for wildlife. And when it increases soil fertility and carbon dioxide storage capacity of the soil, I think we have to weigh whether or not herbicides are a justified means to do that. And well, we can discuss whether or not herbicides are a good way to do that for biodiversity, but in general, I think they are a viable tool also to protect biodiversity outside of the field.
I think we need another hour, another public discussion to work out this question. But I thank you very much. And I think we can conclude that the local level is very, very important, taking into account the global challenges that have to be solved on a local level, that education is important, that the role of women has to be stressed, and the role of nutrition to women has to be stressed in this debate. And that I've been talking to 4, and in the end only 3 scientists who have a lot of good solutions for this. Thank you so much. I would like now to give the microphone back to Mr. Stetter, who has been listening to us as one of the team of the organizers, and he is going to give us the final summary words of what he takes from this discussion to the rest of the conference, and to solve all the global problems that we try to talk about. Thank you so much to Thomas, who hopefully can listen to us, to Bill, to Svenja, and to Sarah. And Mr. Stetter, the floor is yours for the final words.
Thank you. I would also like to thank all the panelists for this really exciting and interesting discussion. I really enjoyed following personally, but also I think for all our listeners, they really enjoyed the discussion. I think our take home here can really be that we need to develop those technologies, but they need to be adapted to the local questions and need to actually address those questions that are have to be seen locally and at the spot where they are needed, rather than from far away giving distant solutions. For this, I think we can agree all that we need interdisciplinary research to develop those ideas, to bring those ideas, and then also this discussion with the public to bring these ideas forward to the people, to educate, but also to gain a general social understanding of how these processes work and get people involved. And with that, in the name of the competence area food security, I would like to thank all the panelists and also you, Ms. Busse, very much for the great moderation of this talk and of this discussion. And I think it was very enjoyable. And as you said, we would still need a lot of debate and discussion to follow through. And I encourage everybody to have that discussion with your colleagues, with your friends, and to gain an idea of how these processes work. Thank you all.
Thank you, Markus, and thank you to all the participants online, wherever you were following us.